everybody, and welcome to Modern Day Debate. We have another awesome discussion for you tonight. This is going to be pretty cool. We got a three-way discussion between Brenton, an anarchist communist, Gregory, radical capitalist, and Connor, a market socialist. So this is going to be a very interesting discussion, to say the least. I see a lot of familiars in the chat. If you would, please smash that like button. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe and become part of the family. We like to try and challenge beliefs here as well. I want to let everybody know that everyone's welcome, no matter your background, your walk of life, your race, creed, religion. We don't really care. The only rule we do have is no hate speech. So if there's something that could get Modern Day Debate in trouble with YouTube or somebody else that will shut down the channel, we can't allow it. So let's start with that. And for the format of this discussion, I think we will go with 2 to 5 minute opening statements, depending on how long you need to take. No problem if you need to go a little longer or if you don't need that amount of time. And then we will go into a rebuttal period of about 5 minutes apiece. I like to hear the ideas, so if you have to go 5 minutes and 30 seconds or whatever, that's fine. And then we'll jump into an open discussion between the contenders here. And then lastly, we'll have a Q&A. So if you have any questions that you think about during the discussion and you want them answered, just try and tag me in the side chat. My name is Converse Contender. It's written right here below. And just tag me and put your question, and I will try and read it out. Super chats get bumped to the top of the list. All right. So thanks everybody for supporting the channel, and let's get started. Brenton, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Brenton Lengel. I am a playwright and author, activist from New York City. I was really heavily active in the Occupy Wall Street movement almost 10 years ago now, and starting to look like that time again now that we're got the economy melting down around us thanks to coronavirus. I ascribe to libertarian socialism, or another word for that might be anarcho-communism. So essentially, my philosophy goes like this. I am most concerned with human freedom and human flourishing. And one of the reasons why I oppose capitalism and support communism is because communism, and by that I don't mean the Stalinist USSR capital C communism, but the actual definition of communism, which is a classless, stateless, moneyless society where the goods and services are provided free of charge to everyone within that society, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. And this is accomplished by eliminating private property and private ownership of vital industry. We can get more into my ideas directly about property, because there is a distinction in the way I talk about private property and the way a capitalist will talk about private property, or what private property would be considered in a court of law. But overall, I am looking to a society that maximizes both the positive and negative aspects of freedom. So freedom, liberty, is a number of different things. There is liberty, there's negative freedom, which is the freedom from something you don't want, avoiding a negative thing. So the ability to not be hit, the ability to avoid domination, physical or otherwise, by another. That is negative freedom. Then there is also positive freedom. Positive freedom is the ability to actually do what you want to do and live life on your terms. What I believe is the optimal situation, because sometimes positive freedom can be toxic to negative freedom, and vice versa. For instance, somebody might say that you, sir, homeless man sleeping under the bridge, you have the same freedom as a millionaire or a billionaire to donate infinite sums of money, as much as you'd like, to the politician of your choice. Now, does the homeless man under the bridge technically have that freedom? Yes. But does that freedom mean anything? No, it doesn't, because he doesn't have the money to donate. So in reality, he's not actually free to do that. So overall, I think what's important is to get to the optimal situation where both positive and negative freedom is maximized for as many people within society. And the best way to go about doing that from our society right now as it is, with the very strict economic and political hierarchies that we all live under, is to really fulfill on the liberal promise of liberty, equality, fraternity, which the liberal governments of the world have promised and promised and promised and never, ever actually delivered. So the way that I see is best to do this is, if we're going to talk about society and we're going to talk about power in society, think of society, there's a power vacuum. And we've seen this happen a number of times when governments collapse or when there is a temporary upending of the social order. There is what's called a power vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. And various groups will vie and fight with each other to claim that throne, essentially, and sit on the power and you know, to seal that power vacuum. The War of Five Kings in Game of Thrones is a good example, or the War of the Roses, or any war that has occurred in a post-revolutionary period or a time of upheaval has been a quest to claim that power, to be the large boulder that plugs that power vacuum. I don't think that's a good idea, because I think if we play that game, there are very few winners and a lot of losers. And a lot of people wind up getting dominated. And even if you get the best possible king or CEO or president that you can have, that's a temporary situation. And eventually that person will either be corrupted by the power that they receive or be replaced. So what I think is optimal for society is what we need to do conceptually is to take that giant rock of power and smash it into a million tiny pebbles, or a bunch of sand if we can, and grind that down to where each individual has roughly the same amount of power as every other individual in society. Together, collectively, we all fill that power vacuum. And that right there, suddenly, will everything be perfect when that happens? No. But what will happen once that's happened is our decisions will be better. May take a little bit longer to come to them if we're functioning democratically, but you get enough people to agree with you. If you have a good idea, you can move society in a much better way, rather than using force and violence dictated through a state structure to affect political change and to keep people in line. Yeah, that's my position, and we can get into that, and we can get into why I think it's a good idea that we abolish money, or if not abolish, transcend money, and what I would put in place of that system.
All right, thanks so much, Brenton. I guess we'll move to Gregory next for your opening statement.
Hello, thank you everyone for deciding to watch this debate. My name is Gregory, or Greg. I'm an advocate for laissez-faire here, where I'm going to be defending the free market in general. It's not necessarily capitalism, not necessarily radical capitalism, not necessarily socialism either, but we'll get into that later. Since last time's debate, I've had a debate on this before. I'm going to take a different approach to attacking socialism and reaching more of a common ground here. So it was addressed that I was attacking state socialism, things like that, instead of other forms of socialism like democratic socialism, market anarchism, and other things like that. So I will try and use an individualist anarchist style argument for why I might advocate for capitalism or whatever, as opposed to socialism. So when we talk about free market or free trade, let's make one thing clear. Historically, the concept of free enterprise has never really been a capitalist concept. In fact, the first person to claim to be a free market advocate was Thomas Hodgkin, who was an anti-capitalist. Pierre-Joseph Proudhon was a free market socialist. This is generally because capitalism has advocated for things like mercantilism, which is imposition of tariffs on immigration, international trade, the use of public chartering in corporations to dominate and exert power over entrepreneurial industries and workers, thus reducing the market's force. So the tables have shifted slightly since back in the classical liberal days, leaving room where I think capitalism and innovators will be the driving market force, and where political classes won't necessarily dominate. And that's the kind of capitalism that I will advocate for here. So, I would like to first refute the Marxist claim that in a free market capitalist society, it always will lead to wars between businessmen and workers. This is not the case. And in a free market, every buck that you earn is based off of how you serve consumers and workers in quality and quantity. As Ludwig von Mises once said, in the capitalistic society, men become rich by serving consumers in large numbers. The capitalistic market economy is a democracy in which every penny constitutes a vote. The wealth of the successful businessman is the result of a consumer plebiscite. Wealth, once acquired, can be preserved only by those who keep on earning it anew by satisfying the wishes of consumers. The capitalistic society, therefore, is an economic democracy in the strictest sense of the word. In the last analysis, all decisions are dependent upon the will of the people. When Mises said this, he said the word economic democracy, which is usually thought of as describing socialism. So this was a tongue-in-cheek term. But the market is the sum of all voluntary human action, is what he's trying to say, and would therefore be the purest form of democracy in its economic form. What I'm suggesting is not a political class struggle that exists between businessmen and workers in our present society. What I'm advocating for, what currently exists, I believe, is an exploiting political class versus producers, such as entrepreneurs and workers. Another common criticism of the market would be that it will ultimately lead to monopoly over resources and land. But then again, we can quote Ludwig von Mises. Nowhere and at no time has the large-scale ownership of land come into being through the working of economic forces in the market. It is the result of military and political effort. Founded by violence, it has been upheld by violence and by that alone. Jeremy Wayland, a libertarian activist, wrote about the existence of entropy of aggregated wealth, beginning to deplete. Insurance costs, defense costs, and stewardships are too much to handle without vastly distributing the wealth for someone with a lot of wealth. Whereas those who do not have much money can either hire private defense agencies or organize in forms of militias. If a person has a large monopoly, then his property will likely to be more stolen than common people, which do not have as much money. So the free market would lead to a natural mean or average wealth value, in which if one goes above that and tries to create a monopoly, diminishing returns can happen more frequently and are too much of a burden to bear. If you're well below that, you can easily boost yourself. True libertarianism is against all forms of monopoly, governmental and individual. Corporations that exert monopoly are part of the military-industrial complex. And contrary to the generally held belief that it was the existence of monopoly that led to the government regulation, it is rather the lack of monopoly that began the need for government regulation. The goal of monopoly is to prevent free competition. Corporations that create monopoly loathe and hate competition because competition exerts downward pressure on prices and upward pressure on salaries. Moreover, success does not come with a guarantee of permanency, depending as it prefers. And that kind of vulnerability to loss is no picnic. There exist many solutions to the problem of monopoly, which is that you can give, Rothbard has suggested this, and it's called homesteading, which is that you can give ownership to the means of production by workers, to workers. So, and in many instances, companies and businesses do that, rather than mere pure power monopolies. This is how a free market should theoretically work. To quote a famous individualist anarchist named Benjamin Tucker, he says, "The fact that one class of men are dependent on their living upon the sale of labor, while another class of men are relieved of the necessity of labor by legally privileged to sell something that is not labor, and to such a state of things I am as much opposed to as anyone. But the minute you remove privilege, every man will be a laborer exchanging with other laborers." Furthermore, exploitation cannot arise or have arisen in a truly free market. Franz Oppenheimer, in his book, The State, has an excellent proof of this. He says, if therefore purely economic causes are ever to bring about a differentiation into classes by the growth of a propertyless laboring class, the time has not yet arrived, and the critical point at which ownership of land will cause a natural scarcity is thrust into the dim future, if indeed it can ever arrive. As a matter of fact, for centuries past, ground is not occupied economically. This must mean that it has been preempted politically. Since land could not have acquired natural scarcity, the scarcity must have been legal. This means that the land has been preempted by a ruling class against the subject class and settlement prevented. So, to summarize, the land could not have been occupied by natural and economic means. So, all of this into consideration, why does the free market capitalism of that sort have such a bad rap? It could be largely explained by the New Deal, which happened in the late 30s as a response to the Great Depression. FDR's policies became known as the welfare warfare state. State monopoly capitalism started to become imposed through the subsidization of businesses, the creation of central banking, and thus inflation. Starting from the Progressive era, roughly starting from 1900 to 1916, and continuing with the New Deal, state monopoly capitalism was being given birth to. We no longer had a free market economy. Well, we never really did, but not as much, where producers were slightly protected and where society flourished. But not only was the economic monopoly born under FDR, so was the war monopoly. The obsession with exerting military power over everyone else and trying to be the policeman of the world led to disasters like the Vietnam War and the Cold War, which kind of are connected. The libertarianism I will be defending will be completely antithetical to this kind of capitalism that emerged through these years and still continues today. This political capitalism is on the direct road of fascism, the combination of welfarism, nationalism, and imperialistic interventionism. And even before the New Deal, Marx had talked about market capitalism being in direct line with feudalism monopoly, which is simply not true, as I have shown. Another thing to note is that libertarianism and left socialism share some goals, such as ending monopoly and ultimately the withering away of the state. But left socialism, when taken to its extreme form, can use statist means of violence and aggression to achieve this, such as the dictatorship of the proletariat, violent revolution, and collectivism, which has led to the opposite: totalitarianism, dictatorship, and the worst forms of socialism ever known to mankind, such as what happened in the Bolshevik Revolution. It started out with goals of removing the monopoly and replaced it with an even worse form of monopoly, which is why left socialism eventually became a form of conservatism, which is totalitarianism. If the government is to disappear after the revolution, then how would the collective public run its own property without becoming the state we all wanted to disappear? I think one and the only true way to achieve this would be through slow reform and use of the black market, meaning voluntary actions typically banned by the government, until its eventual minimization. As Samuel Edward Konkin III put it, the black market is anything nonviolent prohibited by the state and carried on anyways. We must use the market in order to achieve freedom. Collectivism never reaches freedom, only the opposite. And lastly, before I kind of finish up, I'd like to talk about libertarianism and its connection to abolitionism historically. Lysander Spooner, a famous individualist anarchist and who happened to be one of the first abolitionists in America, wrote about how the government is basically a collective group of slave owners. Taxation commits theft from the ordinary citizen. If I put a gun to your head and say, give me your money, you would consider that to be immoral, correct? Now, if I say that on the government, why would that be any different? We would make the same argument to slave owners back in the 1800s. If I randomly take some person with some arbitrary trait and start forcing him to do labor, why is that? And you would consider that to be immoral, right? Because he's not allowed to raise and sell any kind of capital, start any kind of business. But all of a sudden, since it's with black people, it's okay to simply degrade them like this? Spooner believed that the government creates virtual slaves through its demand of obedience and expropriation of individuality. Believe it or not, the first U.S. political party to want to ban slavery was called the Liberty Party, not the Republican Party. They believed in libertarianism. There were anarcho-syndicalists, anarchists, libertarians, and just regular moderate libertarians inside. And they base the same principles in being abolitionists. Government and slavery are built off of each other and fundamentally use the same kind of moral principles. So to conclude, basically wrap this all up, a free market is not to be confused with the kind of monopoly capitalism that emerged throughout the years, and it's an economic democracy that destroys monopoly, tries to oppose oppression, and it will accomplish a lot more goals than the dictatorship of the proletariat and violent revolution. This is why we need a new and reformed free market capitalism, one which is reminiscent of the classical liberals like Adam Smith and David Ricardo. So, thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Gregory. All right, we're going to kick it over to Connor. After Connor does his opening statement, if you have, I would suggest having a piece of paper laying around so that you can write down some of the points to all the guys, so that in the rebuttal, I think what we should probably do is just do like a 2 to 3 minute rebuttal, and then after each person goes, do one more 2 to 3 minute rebuttal. I think that would actually be better. That way, if you want to jot down some points along the way, then you get 2 to 3 minutes and you're just like, all right, on this point you said blah, 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 and then you just kind of handle that. And when it goes back through and you hear everybody's ideas again, then you come back and do another one before the open discussion. So if you guys like that, we'll do that. Would you really
Works
have
for me.
1-5?
Sure.
Okay. All right, Connor, go ahead with your opening statement.
Well, basically, I'm just a market socialist, kind of in the middle of everybody. I just think, like Greg said, democracy should be everywhere, including the workplace, but kind of get there a different way through actual democracy, where everybody in the workplace
has a say of what's going on through co-ops. And I don't see how that's a good way. That's the best way as far as I can see, but I don't see that happening through an anarchist system. So I think the best concentration of power we have is just a government that keeps everything from not falling apart and staying together, but everybody has a say of what's going on in that source of power. So I don't believe co-ops alone are a good enough way to keep everything in line. Things could still happen, like everybody agrees, well, if everybody agrees in a corporation, let's just cheat the system, then the system is still going to be cheated. We need something to keep them from cheating the system. And I think governments are the best way of doing that, but not overly powerful. I'm not an authoritarian. I don't think we should say, you're going to do this, 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 and this today, and that's it. You don't get to choose anything, obviously. But I do think we should have market regulations that say, okay, you can't just be a monopoly in every sector and nobody else gets to compete. But you also can't just buy every competition and make yourself a monopoly. We need somebody there to say, no, okay, this isn't acceptable. But I also think that we need to keep the useful aspects of the market, because it definitely does have some innovations, changes, keeping up, as opposed to just kind of guessing at what's going to come next, trying to assume, well, I think the market should go in this direction when it goes a completely different way. So I think in some places hierarchies are necessary. And just like in a co-op, you have hierarchies in a position. So you need a manager in a company and in a co-op, just like you need a governing body to kind of lead people in a direction of, all right, you can't do this because this is immoral and this is going to screw the whole system up. And you're going to have some wage differences in different sectors and different positions. So if you have somebody that's leading the entire operation, the head engineer at a company, he's probably going to be doing significantly more work than somebody else at a company that just stamps the paper and says yes, yes. So there should. That's why I don't agree with necessarily communism. I haven't pushed it that far, because I do think some wage disparities should exist for different amounts of work. That's about it for my opening. I don't really have much.
All right.
I'd like to get into the discussion.
All right. Thanks so much for that opening, and we will shoot it over to Brenton to give a rebuttal of what he's heard so far.
Okay, so I've heard a lot so far. I'm going to do my best to cover it all. So first of all, free enterprise. And Gregory mentioned that what we have right now is not actually a free market, which is true. But what I'm going to posit is that in any system that allows for private property, which is the private ownership of property that you do not possess, but in fact someone else uses on your behalf, there can be no such thing as a free market, because the way the state functions, what the state is it is a monopoly on violence, on justified violence over a given geographical location. This state will naturally, without this state, private property cannot exist. No one can own 100 homes if the people in those homes say, you know what, we don't think you own it anymore, we live here, it's ours, we're not paying you rent anymore. Similarly, no one can own Amazon if all the workers in Amazon decide they don't want Jeff Bezos owning things. Without a military and police to beat and jail them into submission, guess what? They own Amazon because they possess Amazon. That's how anarchists determine ownership, by possession and use, not by legal title or deed. So if you have a free market, to have a market with private property, with that aspect, you must first have a state. And if there is a state, that state will then respond to its most valuable constituents because the state exists to protect property, both with its military and police system. The state will then naturally be corrupted by those people who win at the very free market that you want to have. And in fact, this has happened in every single developed society that has ever existed. Now, we do have like a truly free market in certain societies, it exists in much of the third world where workers are treated horribly, where they live in virtual slave labor. We had it during the Industrial Revolution in England before people actually were able to leverage the government against this kind of thing. And we had it throughout the Wild West when we murdered the Indians and stole all of their stuff. That's a free market. So what I will say right off the bat is that you cannot have a capitalist society. It's a nice idea. It works very nice on paper to have a free market where the government doesn't intervene. But if you are successful and become wealthy, you'd have to be a complete and utter idiot to not then go and buy yourself a mayor or a senator or a president, or just make yourself president because you're a super rich guy and you think you should be. Gee, wonder who that sounds like. So it's very, what I'm hearing is a very Pollyanna idea, a very theoretical idea of how this should work, which is not at all how it works historically and does not work in progress. Similarly, voting with your dollars is simply not democracy because, again, you need money to make money. And the more money you have and the more property you have, the faster you can generate it. And most money is generated not by labor in our society, but by investment. That's why everybody freaks out about the stock market and why production must go up every single year or everything crashes, and why we can't just take a break during a global pandemic, because it is the investment and the return on investment that drives the engine of capitalism. So therefore, people without huge amounts of money always lose in a market economy. Private defense contractors, and I've seen this argument, you've been pulled back, I've been pulled back to this a number of times, that's just a state by another name. That is a state with the democratic mechanisms removed, where the head of state is the owner of that company. And if you actually did that, if you actually went and did private defense companies for everybody, one, they'd fight each other, that you'd have essentially a warring states era thing, and two, this would naturally become a slaving state, where a private defense contractor would voluntarily combine with a private prison and voluntarily combine with a private court, and then they would put in jail as many people as they possibly could get away with and put those lawbreakers to work creating products. Because guess what? That's what we do right now with our private prisons. Electronics, flak jackets, there are whole industries. You see made in the USA on a product you buy, it was most likely made in the USA by prisoners who are, according to the Constitution of the United States of America, slaves of the state. So again, this would be what you are advocating sounds very nice on paper, but in practice would result in mass slavery.
Right, go ahead and wrap it up, Brendan.
Yeah, so the final thing that I wanted to say, I got like 6 hours. Taxation is theft, yes, but also property is theft. And in fact, the act of making something property from an objective standpoint is no different from the act of stealing something. If an alien watches someone sign away a lease and take control of a house, or someone steal a lease and take control of a house, all the alien knows is that paper exchanged hands and one person is living in the house when the other one didn't. Property is theft. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much for that. Gregory, let's just... I know you probably got a lot of points to make, and we'll just make them as brief as possible. That way that we can have more time in the open discussion.
Oh, okay, I'll try. So the first thing is, you have advocated for anarchism. When you're saying these things like, oh, free market will lead to slavery and that and such, how would you ban a free market without the government? You can't just ban all these voluntary transactions and ban these quote unquote imperial things, which I'll debunk later, without some form of a government. Free markets, for the large part, have not really existed in the world. And to say that, they existed through people killing Indians, I think is ridiculous. The kind of free market anarchism, like I've said before, is voluntary transactions, voluntary human action. That's what the market is. It would not be slavery, clearly, because that's involuntary. It would be an individualistic anarchistic style. So, again, you would need a government to take away voluntary transactions, to take away the market, which is what I'm advocating for. You can't have your style of anarchism, which frankly I don't really know at this point, which is saying that like, oh, you just have property like communal property and stuff. That could exist. Communal property could exist, but once again, private property can exist too. In that, you can't say that you can't ban private property without a government. Private property can just be, I own this San Pellegrino, I own this paper. I can't, why can't I do that? Why a government could take that away, but no one else really other than thieves. Which you could have, once again, and this is the next point, which is that private defense agencies are not state. The state encourages violence. The state can lead to police brutality. Private defense agencies are just like, oh, okay, I don't want my house to be taken over. I don't want my house to get destroyed or whatever, and I'm just going to hire someone to try and protect it. The private defense agency does that best will get my economic vote. The state doesn't do that. The state really, and it uses violence against other people. It can like, for instance, in like all the police brutality situations where it killed black people without when they really didn't really do much. So my final point is that the private defense agency, all it does is protect the individual. The state police attempts to enact violence upon others as opposed to truly protecting this individual citizen. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks so much for that. And we'll go over to Connor next to give a rebuttal of anything you've heard you disagree with or you want to make a comment on.
So, just a couple points, like how one thing you mentioned in your rebuttal was you're talking about governments. You need governments to do all these things, and you said that's what you were advocating for. So just really quick, are you saying you want a government regulating a market, Greg?
I do not want a government regulating the market.
I just got confused in the words there then. Okay. So I'm curious how both of you would see a market flourishing under an anarchist system, and we'll get to that later. But also how things are distributed in a communist system without a government. So like housing, how these things are taken care of, bookkeeping, all that stuff. How do we know Rando X has all these things that he's supposed to be getting, other than with somebody with power over that person? And how do we stop any monopolies, bad things as you described them, under a free market without any governing bodies where everybody is equal? How do we stop bad actors? How do we stop monopolies? How do we stop basically anything without anybody that can say no? How anybody has power to say no? If nobody has power to say no, how do we stop somebody just skirting by the line? Which is why Greg was talking about all these things you need a government. Well, I agree. You do need a government. And that's why I'm a market socialist. A market will be regulated. I think that says about it, about what I've written down. So we can go back to
all right,
Brent.
We'll go. Yeah. Do you guys? Do you want to do a second round of rebuttals, or do you want to just jump into the discussion?
I'd like to do a second round of rebuttals.
All right, go right ahead. Let's just keep it brief as possible.
I'll go really fast. So, Greg, you asked me how I would ban things. I wouldn't ban anything. In fact, I wouldn't have to. You hear this a lot out of libertarians, like right libertarians. And it's this idea of like, if I want to hire somebody to work my fields, who are you to stop me? You are going to need a Gestapo to stop me. But you know what? You never hear someone say, like, if I want to work for somebody, how will you stop me? The thing is that when the military and police are removed and nothing takes their place, there really isn't a way to maintain ownership over anything directly. So what I would point this out to is David Graeber. He used this analogy, the principle of the divided island. Imagine an island, and on one half of the island you have anarcho-communists, and on the other half of the island you have anarcho-capitalists. Now on the anarcho-capitalist side, they have private property. Those who work and are successful in the marketplace will move up on the hierarchy ladder. They will get all the money. They will have, and the people at the bottom, they have no assurances, and many of them are starving or living hand to mouth. Then you have the anarcho-communist society on the other side that shares everything equally and accepts all comers. Now, here's what's going to happen with those two societies if you remove the police and borders and walls between them. The lower class in the anarcho-capitalist island will run immediately to the anarcho-communist side, because right there they're going to have everything that they need provided by everyone else. Yeah, they won't ever become the big man. They won't ever become the chief. They won't ever become a millionaire. But they will still have what they need provided. Whereas on the anarcho-capitalist side, once those workers go, what are they going to do without police to stop them from going? They would have to either be offering such a good deal to their workers that they might as well be living in an anarcho-communist society, or they would need to empty their own, empty their own septic tanks and pick their own tomatoes. And then all of a sudden, well, wait a minute. Now we're the capitalists. We're doing all the work. We were supposed to be the ones sitting on top of the society. So any society, and I really think that in practice, any society with its police and its military removed is going to come to resemble, as long as no other force comes in and takes their place, is going to come to resemble an anarcho-communist society much more quickly. And we have seen these societies again and again in history, not just in Catalonia, in anarchist Catalonia during the Russian Civil War, not just in the Ukraine with Nestor Makhno's Black Army, but before the rise of the state, some 5,000 years ago, we saw this is how humans lived. Humans lived in what was called primitive communism, which is very, very similar to anarcho-communism. What we're just simply trying to do is take the freedom that humans enjoyed when we were hunter-gatherer tribes working together collectively, and there were no great, powerful, there were no kings, there were no bosses, and make sure that we can marry that with the technology of the civilization that we have today. The final thing I'll just point out is you talked about the Dasani bottle, or this is personal property. Personal property is property that is held and controlled by a single person, even if you use it for stuff. That anarchists allow people to have, because one person can hold and control and use individual things. It is when someone owns something that they do not possess and do not use, but someone else uses on their behalf and hands the lion's share of the productive power from that to them, because there is a piece of paper somewhere from a government saying that they own that thing. Now, if you want, for instance, if you think that everyone at Amazon will voluntarily give the vast majority of the money over to Jeff Bezos because Jeff Bezos is just that valuable to Amazon, I mean, maybe you could make that case. But honestly, the only reason people agree to work for Amazon for the tiny wages that they are given is because they have no other choice. And thus you have people manipulated and controlled, not directly by a truncheon, but indirectly by controlling the situation and by leading the donkey around with a stick. I don't want this. I don't want the carrot or the stick.
All right, thanks so much for that. We'll go over to Gregory. Go ahead.
Okay, so firstly, I'd like to, sorry. Okay. So firstly, you didn't address my argument about when I said which society would you say was a completely free market and did all these things like killing Indians, having all these things. You didn't address that argument, because such a society that existed is not a free market at all. It would have government, either indirectly or directly through legal titles. Secondly, I'd like to talk about private property. When we talk about private property, in my sense, when I talk about private property, I'm not saying legal titles granted by the government. I'm talking about personal property. You can find it whatever way you want. You can find the San Pellegrino simply as not a legal title, but as just personal property. It's semantics, in my opinion. The next thing you said was, could you repeat the last part you said, by the way?
Personal property versus private property, where I was giving the distinction. I think that was the last thing I had.
Sorry, the second to last.
The second to last thing.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think you threw me. Can I instead respond to what society was functioning without a government in a totally free market? I'll give you a perfect example of that. The British East India Company. Because the British East India Company functioned outside of England's borders and did whatever it wanted. And what it wanted to do was starve 10% of the Indian subcontinent to death in a single year. We have seen... it was called like the Age of Heroic Commerce. And you can look this up. Companies functioning outside of a state structure and doing whatever they want is a recipe for oppression and death. And a great example of why this is, for instance, the famines in India. That was just 1 year when they starved 10% of the Indian subcontinent to death. They did it again and again. They did it in Africa. They did it in Afghanistan. Ironically, Afghanistan stopped them. Afghanistan is where empires go to die. But the important thing about what happened with the British East India Company and what happened when the first colonists in America landed is that it's a free-for-all for a short period of time, and in that free-for-all, some of the worst things come out within humanity. When the East India Company came to India, later on in their development, they built railroads. And people will say, oh, the Indian famines, well, that was just famine. It was uncontrollable. No, it wasn't, because the towns that had railroads going to them starved faster than the towns that didn't have the railroads, because the British were shipping so much wealth and so much food out of the country and simply didn't care about the Indian workers. And we've seen this play out time and time again in society. Homo homini lupus. And the act of becoming powerful erodes your compassion. It erodes your ability to understand and empathize with the people beneath you, and that leads to atrocity. So that's the answer to what society you wanted to know.
Okay, so anarcho-communism. How would anarcho-communism deal with a private corporation that would do something like that?
I mean, how would we organize the workers and overthrow them? A good example, I would tell you to take a look at the recovered factories movement in Argentina. And this happened in the 90s. There's a great documentary about it called The Take, which I highly recommend you watch, where the government put into place as many, it wasn't a totally free market because there was a government, but it had as many, they sold off everything public. They had the streets were owned by Visa and MasterCard. And it was a disaster. The country was looted by geopolitical powers, and what happened was that the government eventually put a kibosh on anyone selling the factories, because they found that the rich Argentinians who owned these factories used them, and when they didn't become profitable enough and they weren't getting any more subsidies from the state, they shut them down and tried to sell them for parts. What happened was that the workers were sitting there looking at these empty factories with nothing to do, and that factory provides for me, that provides for my family the stuff that we need the community uses. So they broke down the fences. They ran the factory themselves with no bosses, direct democracy. The police came and tried to kick them out. They fought off the police with slingshots you can actually see in this documentary, it functions, it works. Everything runs without that guy at the top stealing everything and taking subsidies from the government. So I would just say, look into anarcho-communist societies, anarcho-syndicalist societies. Look at Catalonia, look at the Ukraine, look at the YPG / PKK before they got annihilated by Turkey after the United States betrayed them. And look at the recovered factories movement in Argentina. There's also an amazing corporation called the Mondragon Corporation in Spain, and that's run as a collective. And it's multi-million-dollar corporation that runs on a very close to an anarcho-syndicalist model.
Okay, I'd like to address some of these things. Firstly, I don't understand how this is an attack on individualistic anarchism. Workers can rise up and go against their bosses. Syndicalism can occur in free markets. I don't think they're mutually exclusive.
I mean,
Secondly,
it's not an attack on individualist anarchism. It's an attack on anarcho-capitalism and capitalism in general.
I'm going to guess we're just in the rebuttal. We're in the open discussion.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm just kind of I'm more.
Wait, hang on.
I was about to say, if you guys want, if you just.
I'm fine going right into the open discussion.
Okay, we can just go into open discussion.
Yeah, go ahead. Gregory, finish what you were saying.
Yeah, so I think that, once again, I'm going to try and advocate more for individualistic anarchism than anarcho-capitalism. I don't think an anarcho-capitalist society, a fully capitalist society, will necessarily work. And the second is that things like Makhnovist Ukraine, essentially you could say that Makhno was the government, because initially, it started out kind of like as a utopian society that I think this full model of anarcho, like complete communal property kind of is. And so, Makhno became the government. I think in an anarcho-communist society, like the primitive anarchist society, I don't understand why you would want to go back to those times, because the computer that we're debating with was kind of fueled through economic production, not necessarily through capitalist production, but rather just through a market. So I think... So
there were a lot of the computer stuff that was created by the Soviet Union, and a lot of it came out of the space race. But I'm sorry, we've got our market socialists here. I just want to make sure you get a chance to speak.
If you're done on that point, I'll jump in there. I kind of cut out halfway through. My internet died, so I kind of missed half of the argument, so I have no idea what's going on.
Oh, okay. Do you want me to keep going and then you can catch on?
Yeah, just finish that point.
I just didn't want to be rude.
I'll jump in.
Okay, so you can't quote Ludwig von Mises and say you're not doing a anarcho-capitalist thing. Like Ludwig von Mises and Murray Rothbard, like they are anarcho-capitalism. And in fact, more Rothbard than von Mises, but I will also point out that anarcho-capitalism, it's physically impossible. Because of Rothbard breaks things down into where you have these private defense corporate companies with overlapping territories that for some reason don't fight each other because of the NAP. Because I don't think Rothbard actually built anarcho-capitalism to work. He simply built it as a propaganda tool to help large industrialists like the Kochs, who had funded him initially, get the kinds of policies they wanted passed. It's a trap. It's not actually a political philosophy. Similarly, like Ludwig von Mises, he's not. You can't talk about individualist anarchists like Lysander Spooner and go to like Ludwig von Mises. Ludwig von Mises is much more in if anything, the classical liberal tradition coming out of Battista as opposed to Proudhon. So, if you want to talk about the individualist anarchists, like Benjamin Tucker, like Lysander Spooner, by all means, talk about the individualist anarchists, but don't confuse the waters by bringing in these extremely hyper-capitalist thinkers. Rothbard wanted a free market in children. He literally wanted people selling kids and buying kids. It's monstrous. He wanted parents to be able to starve their children to death.
Yeah, but I didn't quote Murray Rothbard. In fact, I don't agree with a lot of his opinions, like the historical revisions. That's crazy.
Okay, you quoted Ludwig von Mises, which is like quoting Murray Rothbard, because Murray Rothbard's crazy about Ludwig. Rothbard is the only reason anyone knows who Ludwig von Mises is.
Okay, Ludwig von Mises, just because I quoted Ludwig von Mises once doesn't mean I have to agree with all of his opinions. Just like
Fair
that.
enough.
I'm more a Spooner-esque Tuckerite kind of free marketeer. I think Ludwig von Mises was right about the property thing. That's all I was saying. I wasn't just saying Ludwig von Mises is all correct just because I quoted him. I think he has some interesting ideas about the free market. But then again, when it comes to corporations, they kind of just fall for the corporatist side, I guess, so to speak. So yeah.
Fair enough. Can you explain to me what about individual? So What about Lysander Spooner's economic philosophy really appeals to you? And what are you looking into it, and how does that differ from anarcho-capitalism and standard like right libertarianism? I just want to make sure that I get your position here, so I don't go off on another tear.
Okay, well, I like Lysander Spooner. Primarily, I do like him for economic reasons too, but I like him too for his just his general classic liberal idea of like slavery and government kind of being one and the same. That's I like that about him. I think like being what it differs from anarcho-capitalism is that anarcho-capitalism is against necessarily labor unions or such or whatnot. Mm-hmm. I mean, like the non-aggression principle, I don't really necessarily like go for, because if you need labor unions, if you need like positive liberty, like there's an analogy once that said if a billionaire has a lot of money and he could like cure a disease that everyone else has, like by just giving some of his money away, the negative libertarian would say no, but I wouldn't say so. I would say that sometimes force might be used. I don't think force should be used much. Like in that sense, I kind of do like the non-aggression principle. But like in extreme situations like these, I believe in going against the non-aggression principle. So again, I don't think like this whole thing with violence, like the state is founded on violence. Why are we using so much violence to overthrow systems? Is like the original is my big point.
All right, I'll interject there. So I'm curious where you draw that line. So let's say thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people are we're back. Okay, thousands upon thousands of people are starving in the streets and have nowhere to live and basically living an awful life. Should we use some of the money from those billionaires to save those people out of that system?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I was addressing the complete complete negative libertarians who would advocate for going against that. I think there needs to be some room for things like that. That's a problem that negative liberty faces. So yeah, I would agree with you.
Okay, so some social safety nets are a good thing.
Yeah.
Well, it's not necessarily social safety net. It can be used through other things, such as, again, labor unions. The things I was talking about, the insurance costs, all of that. The thing I talked about from Jeremy Whalen.
You don't have a job. You don't really have a labor thing to save you. I'm talking about somebody that's dying on the streets because for some reason, they have some mental illness, let's say, that makes them incapable of holding a job. Should we be spending money on helping them?
Through what means? Through what medium?
A social safety net of some sort.
Well,
that's
as an
my
individual,
advocate, so let's go with that.
Well, as an individual anarchist, I would probably say no. No, but through some other means other than a state, which I believe is founded by violence.
So let me ask you something really quickly, and this is kind of on the. And I don't mean to pick on you, Gregory, because So what I want to ask you about is, what do you mean by the state is founded on violence? I will agree that the state, by definition, exists to use violence. That's what a state is. It's an organization that possesses a monopoly over the justified use of force in a given geographical area. It is this very force that allows much of society to function the way that it functions right now, because it maintains the legal laws and the codes. So, for instance, we talk about people. You talked about, for instance, a millionaire who has or a billionaire who has all the money that he needs, more than he needs, and then you've got people that need medicine or they're going to die, and the only way to get that medicine to them, let's say hypothetically, is to take money from him, and he says, absolutely not. This is my money. I earned it. I will not give it up voluntarily. I will die before you allow me to take that money from me. And there will be people who do that. We've seen it happen again and again. So the state, in the market socialist situation here, would take money from him either via taxation or some sort of fine or some emergency thing, and use it to help those people. And you said that would be acceptable. So there is a line. it seems like there is a line where you're okay with violence. Just what I'm trying to figure out is like, when is violence justified? When is it not?
Well, okay. So what I meant to say the same like definition you said for the state, which is like about violence. But when I brought up the analogy, I was kind of like raising the question, which is how would you address that problem? How would you address the problem of the billionaire having all the money? How would you take it? I don't agree that it should be done through state force or taxation. So I'm wondering what you would think about that. How would you take away the money from the billionaire?
Well, ideally, I wouldn't take away the money from the billionaire. I'd take away the billionaire's private property, because really the money is just a symbol. Like, money isn't real.
Then you're okay with the violence, right?
This is the thing. I am okay with violence can be justified when it is used to prevent greater violence. And there is such a thing as, and now I'm not actually like an advocate for violent revolution. I want to make that very, very clear. I am an advocate for violence when it is absolutely no other choice. And if you do nothing, something worse will happen. So for instance, there's a thing called structural violence, and this is violence that occurs to people, maybe not directly from a person, but indirectly as a consequence of broad social systems. A good example of it might be, for instance, a police officer shooting an innocent black man because he views black people as inherently more dangerous. That is structural violence. Another example of structural violence might be a homeless person with mental illness who can't work or for whatever reason can't participate in society, dying on the street of a preventable illness because he cannot make himself valuable enough to capitalists to allow the system to grant him access to necessary food, medicine, or shelter. These are just as much deaths and just as much violence as anything else. And so, I ultimately think the state should be done away with and money should be abolished or transcended. But at the same time, we want to look at the reality of the situation and how do we solve this problem? Well, there's a very obvious, very quick way that we can solve the problem without necessarily a revolution, and that is a strong workers' movement that pushes the government to tax that wealthy guy, whether he likes it or not, and puts the money to good use. I think this is a temporary situation, which is why I'm not a market socialist or necessarily like a democratic socialist like Bernie. Because I think that the state kind of by its structure can't be used that way. It would be very nice if it could. And the day that I am convinced that the state can actually represent the people and not the elite, I'll go for that immediately. But what I've been kind of coming around here to is it is right to use violence if it is a last resort and it preserves more life than would happen if you didn't use violence.
So I have a little interjection. I'm curious why you think the people can represent themselves more effectively than an elected state, because as we see very often, people don't really represent themselves that well. For example, they'll advocate for I want the best computer, and then they'll go out and buy a shitty laptop when they could have built their own computer with an hour's research. Mm-hmm. Or they'll buy an Apple instead of buying Samsung when they say, I want freedom of my mobile device. Mm-hmm. So I find that people will just kind of
how do you solve the problem?
Back to comfort? No. To comfort and things that they know will always just kind of work for them and won't fail on them. Instead of saying, actually, I want this. I want something better for myself. They'll just kind of fall back on, well, this has worked and I don't want to fail. So more fear than stupidity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
was that question for me or Gregory?
Yeah.
You,
because you were just talking and I wrote something down while you were talking. So
I don't want to dominate too much here, so I'll answer you very quickly. So I think that human nature is mutable, and people change and grow depending upon their surroundings and the types of challenges that come up in front of them. And yeah, we do prefer the comfortable, and sometimes we do make foolish decisions. What I think is really weird is thinking that a manager, a boss, a CEO is above making foolish decisions. And when you give one person a huge amount of power, their foolish decisions hurt many more people than someone with less power's foolish decisions. I would actually say that go back and take a look at like the way we ran things at Occupy Wall Street, where everyone was involved in the process. We had what was called the General Assembly, where there were no leaders. There were facilitators that tried to help everybody communicate. But overall, we made decisions collectively as a group for, however many people showed up at a time. So 700, 800, 3,000 people would show up, and we'd hash it out, talk, and eventually created the document, which was the Declaration of the Occupation and we ran that mini society inside the larger society for a good 6 months until Mayor Bloomberg released the state to destroy us. And the NYPD raided the block and beat everybody up and threw my friends in jail. But when you give people real power to a certain extent, and when they really feel that they're being listened to and that what they say and do matters, they will pay more attention and they will often rise to that occasion. So I think one of the ways to get people to be less foolish is to challenge them by giving them the ability to actually do things as opposed to having someone else make those decisions for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I disagree, but I don't know if Gregory has something to say.
Okay. I just, sorry for interrupting. Basically what I'm going to say is these temporary situations which you talk about where, you decide to use the state to redistribute some taxation is where we get situations such as Maoist China, Stalinist Soviet Union, Cambodia. When you use the state for things like these, when you use the state to interject, say, I'm an anarcho-communist, but sometimes we're going to have to use this in order to do that, that will lead to the worst situations we know today, which is why.
So if somebody gets taxed, suddenly we're going to have the Great Purge in the Soviet Union?
No, once you give the government concentration of power, then that concentration of power will become irresistible and lead to bad situations.
I would agree if you give the government too much power. First, I was talking like that was not me speaking as an anarcho-communist. That was me speaking like as a manager. Like, how do you solve the problem that's right in front of you right now? I was talking about the ethics of it, not, ideally how I would solve that problem, like if I were king anarchist or whatever. What I'm saying,
communism.
Yeah. Now, what I'm saying is that like you mentioned that you don't want to give the government too much power, and I agree 1,000% with that. But like, how much power is too much power for the government to have? Like, where's your line? Where does it go from, say the government that we have right now? What's the difference between that and suddenly Maoist China? Well,
I think like any kind of like power that the government has is already too much.
Why aren't we purging people now?
Sorry, what?
Why isn't the U.S. government purging people right now? Like, why haven't I been thrown into a gulag? Because the government certainly does have power. So if some power is too much, why are we not seeing the excesses of the Soviet Union or the Third Reich expressed in the United States?
Well, I think that's kind of a straw man, because I wasn't really saying like, too much power any power is too much power, and therefore that will lead to communism. I'm saying that there's the two forms of totalitarianism or authoritarianism, which I know are the ones that go to the communist direction, which are socialists and stuff like that, and Pinochet style at the extreme, and in more moderate context, United States. I think the difference between the way the right-wing capitalism works and the left-wing the left-wing authoritarian system works and the right-wing authoritarian system works, both are bad, but the left-wing communist system can all too easily fall into totalitarianism, whereas the right-wing form like manifests itself in kind of like these corporatist titles.
Hang on. So Anarchist Catalonia did not fall into what you're talking about. Neither did Nestor Makhno's forces with the Black Army. Neither did, like, the libertarian communists have never fallen into totalitarianism. The Paris Commune did not fall to totalitarianism, and I didn't see any indication that it necessarily would.
I didn't. Sorry, you can finish.
Well, you were talking about like the right and left wing of socialism. The right and left wing of socialism is Marxism. Like, in fact, people will talk about like Marx-Leninism as a right deviation of traditional socialism. So you could put anarcho-communism, anarcho-syndicalism on the left side of socialism, and you could very easily put something authoritarian like the Marx-Leninism, Maoism on the right end of communism. Or were you trying to say something along the lines of like, do you think that the U.S. government is communist now or socialist?
No. Okay. Well, I wasn't really saying that. I didn't say that. Okay, I'm going to say a couple points. First of all, I didn't say that anarcho-communism is the one that will lead to power. I'm saying that your brand of temporary government power and then we return back to stateless society is not going to work. The second thing is that
I would agree that it's not going to work in the long run. I was simply making again, that was not me advocating my system. That was me giving you like what. It was me talking about the ethics of the situation and what to do immediately, as opposed to if there's like a mass movement or a total shakeup in the structure of the system. Okay,
so then you clarified that. The Paris Commune didn't lead to, but the Makhnovist Ukraine thing. Once again, that kind of did lead to authoritarianism when. Because Makhno eventually became the government, the whole system collapsed in like 2 years. It didn't work.
No, it didn't.
And hold on, by the way.
No, you're completely incorrect. I'm sorry. The system that Makhno was running did not collapse. What happened was the Black Army was extremely effective, and in fact dealt the final death blow against the white forces. They defeated the Tsarists on behalf of the Red Army when they had entered into an alliance with them. Then they were betrayed by the Red Army. They were taken to the leaders of Makhno's army were literally grabbed, jailed, assassinated by the Bolsheviks, and Nestor Makhno had to flee to France and died of tuberculosis.
Okay, but I was just saying that Makhno eventually had to secede to authoritarianism. That's all I was saying.
I mean, he didn't collapse into it. It was forced upon him by treachery.
So I want to give Gregory a chance to respond to that, and then I want to get Connor's. I want to get your take. Okay, so we're going to go for about maybe another 5 minutes or so, and then we have to get to the Q&A because we got some questions to answer. And then what I want to do is after you give what you were saying there, Gregory, and then we get to Brenton and Connor with a couple of last responses. Then I want to run through, and I want you to give because some people are asking. I want you to give like, hey, Brenton, you're labeled as an anarcho-communist, Gregory, radical capitalist, and then market socialist, so on. I want you to, on your like closing, I want you to say, this is what I mean by radical capitalist or by market socialist, and here's what, like, draw together the threads, because some people are saying, what do they mean by their labels? But then you can use that opportunity to tell us what you mean by it, and then how it applies to what we've said so far. So, Gregor, go ahead and finish.
Sure, I thought I did that in my opening statement, but if...
there are some people that come in late.
Oh,
so
okay.
So go ahead.
Wait, so should I respond to what he said?
Yeah,
or should
go ahead and respond, and then after you do, that's when we'll try and we'll get Connor's thoughts, and then we'll kind of close so that we can get to the questions. So go ahead and respond.
Okay. So anarcho-communist societies, what I was saying in general, they don't last long. Because they ally themselves with Bolsheviks, and then that happens because they have no protection, they have no functioning. They don't really have much of a functioning society. And other forms of anarcho-communism, like we've seen, like in Catalonia, those may build roads at first, which is good. They into market anarchism, and then they ally themselves with communists, and it ends up failing. That's the point I was making.
Yeah, but I mean, you could say that about. So before feudalism transitioned from, feudal monarchies to like the modern nation states, there were attempts to create republics that failed. Like they failed again and again and again. Somebody back then could have looked at that and said, oh, obviously liberal democracy doesn't work. And we just have to have kings because this system can't keep itself together. Just because a system has not managed. Oh, we lost, hopefully he'll be back in.
I'll ask you something really quick then, because it's not too Greg. So you said you that transition period you were talking about doesn't necessarily represent your opinion.
I mean, I compartmentalize. I mean, dude, I've worked as a manager. So like a manager in a capitalist company, like hiring and firing employees. So, I have my ideals and the way I want things to go. And then I have the practical everyday right in front of me. How do you deal with this situation?
Okay, just making sure you weren't like accelerationists just tomorrow.
No.
Okay.
That would be monstrous.
A little Poseidism in there, get it good.
You get the UFOs in.
My internet wasn't really working, so if you could just say your point again.
Sure. What was the last thing you heard before you got kicked out?
Pretty much all of it. I didn't really hear.
Oh, geez. Okay. So what I was saying was that before feudal monarchies were replaced by liberal nation states, liberal democratic nation states. There were numerous attempts to establish these liberal democratic nation states that failed. That one reason or another were not able to take over the entire society. We find ourselves at a similar point in our history where there have been very promising and interesting attempts at creating a libertarian socialist society that have failed for other structural reasons. Now, they haven't failed. They didn't collapse in on themselves. The anarchists in Catalonia ran that entire region and whole cities collectivized for 3 years straight. Under Buenaventura Durruti, they actually wound up dealing like one of the only significant defeats to significant decisive defeats of a modern mechanized army by a civilian force armed with antique rifles and handmade explosives. They kept the fascists off for 3 years. They did eventually have to enter into a alliance with the Soviet Union, but of course that was only because the Soviet Union was the only one who would help them. It was just the Soviet Union and the Mexicans. The Mexicans were the only ones that sent them weapons. If the United States and the other liberal bourgeoisie capitalist powers had recognized fascism for the threat that it was and armed the anarchists in much the same way that they recognized ISIS for the threat that it was and armed the PKK YPG, we might have seen an anarcho-communist Spain right now. Similarly, if Donald Trump had not betrayed the PKK YPG and allowed the Turks to roll over them out of nowhere, again, we might see the beginnings of one of these states growing. And then once that genie is out of the bottle, I don't think people are going to want to go back to living under the capitalist boot heel. So, these early attempts have not necessarily been as successful as we would have liked them to be, but the amount of success that we have actually seen out of them is staggering, particularly when you consider the material conditions of the people in that time, the technology that they had access to, and the incredible array of forces that were aligned against them.
All right.
Okay.
If you guys are okay with stopping there, what we'll do is we'll just move to our closing.
Sure.
So just say your title and what you mean by it, and then just wrap it up. Just say, and that's why I think he was wrong on this or that or whatever, and just give your closing. So you want to we'll start backwards then. Maybe we'll start with Connor and move back that way.
So my title tonight was Market Socialist. What I mean by that is basically my goal is just the best for everybody possible, and maybe you might have to use some violence some way like the government, but as long as the final goal is the best, absolute best for everybody. So if that means a government has to come in and say, no, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, we need to do this to have as many people in the best situation as possible, then this is what we need to do. If that isn't the system, well, tell me, and I want the best. But as far as I see it, just having a government keeping people down a path that leads to the best for everybody is the best system to do it by. And if some guy with $60 billion needs to be told, no, you don't need $60 billion. The guy dying on the street needs it. we're taking it and giving it to him, then so be it. And I wish I was that billionaire to give it that money to them. That's basically my opinion. Normally, I'd be where Brenton is for the fighting for the ANCOMs, but not tonight. I guess we switch it last minute.
Yeah, sorry about that. Didn't mean to come in and upend things. Can I go next, and can we have Gregory go last? Because I went first. It wouldn't be fair for me to go first and last. All right, so I am an anarcho-communist, libertarian socialist. What I am looking to do is to create a society in which human freedom is maximized in both the positive and negative aspects of it, which means freedom from oppression and the freedom to actually do things. And the best way that I see accomplishing this is to build communism, which is a classless, stateless, moneyless society where the property is held as the common productive property, the means of production are held as the common property of the whole. They are effectively controlled by the people that actually operate them, by the workers, by the people who physically do the work, and they do that work from each according to his ability, to each according to his need, not to earn money, not to build their own little empire where everybody works for them, but to make things better for everyone, including them and their family. I want to eliminate both the poor and the wealthy, and you do that by spreading the wealth around and by allowing the things that we need to be freely given rather than withheld in order to coerce people into doing what you want them to do.
All right, thanks so much, Gregory.
Okay, so when I say I'm radical laissez-faire, that means I advocate for individualistic anarchism, which means negative liberty and some form of positive liberty can exist alongside that. But I don't believe in the completely utopian ideals of stateless, classless, moneyless society full of positive and negative liberty. That sounds great on paper, but it doesn't really work. The only way you can really truly achieve a society without the state and without most forms of exploitation would be, well, to just simply have an individualistic anarchist society. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much for that. Make it brief. Brevity certainly isn't one of my strong suits, so I appreciate that. All right. So we'll just move into the Q&A section here, and we've got quite a few super chats to get to. If you want to ask a question, or if I could have missed your question, tag me at Converse Contender, and I'll check it out. First question we have, well, actually, it's not a question. Caleb sent in, or Caleb maybe. I don't remember how he likes that pronounced.
Caleb?
I don't think it's that Caleb. K-A-L-U-B. Says, This is dry. I'm out. Bye. So
that's definitely not Caleb.
Right.
Yeah.
So we did have a $5 super chat from Stupid Whore Energy. Thank you so much for your super chat. She always just pours money. Must have a big trust fund or something. Says, question for Gregory. Do you really want to leave things like a car that has bad brakes and kills people up to the invisible hand of the market?
Okay, well, the free market, in my opinion, would basically do this. The best companies that can best fund those breaks and make sure that they don't kill people on the road would be the result of a free market. With that, when you don't have that, when you simply have a complete primitive communalism or the Bolshevik style socialism, then those things are more likely to happen. Without proper economic production and a high GDP per capita, which has been shown to be higher in more market-style economies, these kinds of accidents would probably not happen. Which is why I defend the market.
Okay, thanks so much for that. We have a $10 super chat from Live a Life Filled with Love. Thanks so much for your support. They say, in all honesty, not totally for capitalism, but in a communist society, everyone is equal, which to me sounds like crap. I don't want to be held back by lower people who cannot reach success and status.
Is that to me?
That's not for anybody specifically, so if you guys want to both respond, Connor and Brenton, that's up to you guys.
Connor, I want to respond to that, but why don't you go first? Because I've talked a lot.
Well, I'm not really a communist system, so I'm fine with having hierarchies in a society, just not 2,000 times the income hierarchy. So.
Yeah. So what I'm going to say is equality is not sameness. And, what people are not necessarily going to pull you down when you are equal. Essentially, this is the Randian argument. It's the idea that everybody thinks that they're the one, they're the genius, they're the great inventor that's going to rise above everybody and earn those riches and grab that treasure at the top. The fact of the matter is that this does not happen to the most worthy people. A great example would be Bill Gates, for instance. And people say, well, what do you have against Bill Gates? Bill Gates earned his money. No, he didn't. What Bill Gates did was Bill Gates just happened to be in the right place at the right time, because when IBM came knocking looking for a system to run their new computers, the guy that they actually wanted to get was out flying. He was flying in his jet, and so they went back to Bill Gates and they said, Bill Gates, can you make us this? This guy didn't answer the phone. And so Bill Gates created QDOS, which stands for Quick and Dirty Operating System. He ripped off the guy who was out flying and became the Bill Gates that he is today. Not only that, but the only reason why IBM was in a position to make Bill Gates as wealthy as he became was that they helped Hitler carry out the Holocaust. And literally the money from that was some of the seed money that went into them creating this new line of personal computers. So, the fact of the matter is you show me any great concentration of wealth and power and privilege, I will show you an idiot at the top and I will show you a giant pile of bodies at the bottom. You can be different than people. You can express yourself in your individuality in a wonderful way in communism. And in fact, I think you will actually have a better chance of doing that than you ever will in capitalism, with its empty promises of success that 99.99% of us never get.
All right, thanks so much for that.
Can I respond to one thing?
Ahead.
This is, I'm not saying necessarily as a point of disagreement. I think what he's trying to say is that Bill Gates created value and that's why he deserved his money. Windows is a very valuable tool that most of us use. Some use Mac OS, sure, but yeah, I think he's just saying people create value, get more wealth, and people who create value.
Why do they get to be king just because they created value?
And what about the guys that are making it now? He sits at the top.
He's at the top because he created value. It's a consumer plebiscite.
What value did IBM create when they helped Hitler carry out the Holocaust?
He didn't create any value.
They got a lot of money. They got pushed straight to the top.
I don't think that was necessarily as a result of the capitalist system.
It definitely was a result of the capitalist system.
Why do you think it was a result of the capital?
Because they were operating for profit, and the Germans were paying.
The Nazis are not. The Nazis. Okay, listen. Nazis were not a capitalist society, and they were basing it off of we're not a market society.
I mean, Hitler coined the term privatization. I mean, I would say that the Nazis themselves were not capitalist or socialist. They were fascist, and fascists don't have principles. But I mean, if you want to look at Nazi Germany, look at who was in charge in Nazi Germany. It was the capitalist class. It absolutely was. Hitler was supported by so many giant industrialists.
Okay, so define capitalist class and working class. It's just, I think these are arbitrary definitions you're making. In a feudal society, I would understand there are legal titles that say, okay, this guy is this guy is this is caste. But there is not such a thing in market society. Capitalist class, working class, those are all arbitrary definitions. And I think
class in general, it's not fixed, but it's not arbitrary, but it's not codified by law. A capitalist is someone who owns significant capital, who owns the means of production and derives the majority of their income not from their labor, but from that ownership. So if, for instance, I owned a huge share of the money in IBM, So I go to the shareholders meeting with IBM. Maybe I'm on the board of IBM. Maybe I get hired as a CEO, and I get those dividends paid back from the work that IBM does and the profits that IBM makes. That is a capitalist. Whereas when you in a capitalist system, those people are the ones who make all the important decisions because they have all the money and because they own all of this productive capital. The worker and the working class are the people who trade their labor for wages in order to get the money that they need. So that's the distinction.
So would you say a UPS truck driver who has a 401k or a pension fund, and that pension fund invests in Google, is a capitalist just because he owns stocks? There's many people who exchange labor and own stocks.
Yeah, okay. So again, think like a gradation. There's levels of how much actual capitalism someone is engaging in. That's a very good question. But what I'm going to tell you is the UPS truck driver who has a 401k, which may be now worthless while the economy goes down. But if he has the 401k, but he is still, so he's a minor bit player in the market, but he is still making the majority of his money from the physical labor that he does, he is a worker. Even if he brings in some money from investments, he's a worker. Now, you become a capitalist when you are making all or most of your money not from your labor, but from investments.
Would you say someone who owns a senior portfolio position at let's just say a high hedge fund or an investment bank, who exchanges money for his labor, is a capitalist or a worker just because he makes, let's just say, a good salary of something like $450K, $500K a year?
Hey, who's paying him the salary?
The hedge fund manager.
Okay, so this is a guy who does labor for the hedge fund manager, and he's being paid a good salary by the hedge fund manager. That would be a worker. Because again, if you can make a good salary as a worker, but if you're still doing work, you're still that. Now, however, somebody making $450K a year, if they don't have investments, they're a freaking idiot. And so, they would be very much on their way to becoming a capitalist if they weren't a capitalist already by the end of that.
Which is why these classes, just one more thing, which is why these class distinctions that you make are arbitrary.
They're not arbitrary. They're based upon general trends in society, based upon how people make money.
Okay, just because someone makes money off of labor, once again, I'm going to make the same point. Just because someone makes money off of labor does not mean that they can't be stockholders. Again,
no, it doesn't. But look, the interests of someone who makes money from wages are in direct conflict with the interest of someone who makes money from profits, because wages are a cost going towards that profit. So if you make most of your money from the stock that you own, it is in your best interest that wages be as low as possible, because if less money is going to wages, that means more money is going to you, and vice versa. If you are a worker, it is in your best interest that the stockholders make as little as possible and that you make as much as possible for the labor that you put in.
All right,
I don't think that's correct.
Yeah, last thing, and then we got to move on.
Yeah, I don't think that's really correct, because, okay, first of all, let me make a point. People who make money off of profit, most of the time their businesses fail, unless they have an idea which really helps people out. Most of them fail. So people who make money off of profit, let's just say a business owner who's going to fail, let's just say in a year, would you consider him to be a capitalist? If not, he's not going to be rich. He's not going to be rich most of the time. 99%, you only hear about the people who get rich. These people who create businesses, hedge funds, whatever, most of them fail. Would you consider that?
Yeah, and then they become workers because they lose their money.
And also, the entire housing industry is based on just.
So can we do the super chats?
Yeah, this single question was turning into the whole debate, so maybe we'll debate that.
It was a good question.
Yeah. So next we have another $5 super chat from Stupid Whore Energy. Thank you so much. It says, Gregory, as a Christian, how can you support greed/materialism?
I don't support greed or materialism in any sense. First of all, the question I'd ask is, why do you think a market always necessarily leads to greed and materialism? When we talk about, this is the thing, it's often said that Jesus was a state communist or whatever, but he believed, individually, that you need to redistribute resources, give all your money. He's not saying that a state should necessarily reproduce it. So he could be in line with both my thinking and of your thinking. So And basically, and the other thing is, and this also applies to like separation of church and state. People who believe in integration of church and state say that, oh, Jesus said like, oh, you need to go to church every day, but like, or whatever, something along the lines, which is not even really true. But that does not mean that the government needs to enforce that. It does not mean that the government needs to create partnerships with the church. That's the thing. And Jesus is against greed and material wealth, but that should be something from your individual heart, not something that should be enforced through a totalitarian control mechanism.
All right, so since we have so many questions and so little time, we've already been going for an hour and a half. Let's try and keep our answers to the next ones short and pithy, as James says. Somebody in the chat just said that I look like Conor McGregor. I've got that before, by the way. So another $2 super chat from Stupid Whore Energy says, what is Gregory's position on climate change?
My position on climate change is that it is real. It does exist. Climates do change, and they are sometimes due to human causes. They are partially due to human causes and partially due to oceans, the sun, the moon, like a lot of things. A lot of natural causes explain climate change, but also we need to keep in mind how much we expend fossil fuels and energy. So. I would say I would consider myself to believe in climate change.
All right, thanks so much for that. We got another $10 super chat from Live a Life Filled with Love. Thanks so much for that. I am opposed to socialism because it dreams in I think this is ingeniously. No, I'm sorry. You know what? I'm blanking on that term. It dreams of good, truth, beauty, and equal rights. I am for socialist ideals being put on capitalism. In the U.S., capitalism is showing its flaws. Yep. So I'm not sure who that's for, but I am for socialist ideals being put on capitalism. In the U.S., capitalism is showing its flaws. Maybe Gregory for that one?
I'm not really sure what he's trying to say.
Well, why don't you move on to the next question and then just type it in the private chat so we can read it and see what is happening.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's just move on to the next one. I think this was just a statement. That wasn't a question.
Yeah. Okay.
That doesn't seem like a question.
Sure. All right, we'll move on. Ariel Fernandez says, how would disputes be settled in an ANCAP society? ANCAP.
ANCAP. That's anarcho-capitalist society.
Well, I don't necessarily advocate for complete anarcho-capitalism, but I guess what they would say is the question is, can you read that question once again?
Yeah, it's just how would disputes be settled in an ANCAP society?
Well, I guess through tort or through civil agreements. I think that's what most anarcho-capitalists would say. Yeah.
All right.
Like civil mutual agreements. I think that's what most ANCAPs would probably say.
All right. Thanks so much for that. Live a Life Filled with Love. Thanks for your $2 super chat. It says, any opinions on I always forget how to pronounce it. Slavoj Zizek?
Slavoj Žižek.
Slavoj Žižek, yeah.
Yeah. Slavoj Žižek, my opinion of him is he is incredibly entertaining because he is a raccoon that was transformed into a human by a witch's curse. And I think that Chomsky was right when he said that a lot of Zizek is pretty much hot air. He doesn't really say a lot, though what I will say is his points on ideology and the inability to escape ideology is 100% right on the mark. And I think that's one of his best contributions to the discussion. Also, he doesn't know anything about Buddhism. He's a.
All right, thanks so much for that. Connor, if you have anything to say as well, just feel free to stop me.
I had a couple points, but I think Brenton mostly covered them.
All right, thanks for that.
I'm sorry, Connor.
Another $5 super chat from Stupid Whore Energy says, how does radical capitalists deal with workers who become obsolete? Where is the relief?
Repeat that one question one more time.
Yeah, sure. How does radical capitalists deal with workers who become obsolete? Where is their relief?
Well, again, like I wouldn't say that I'm a full anarcho-capitalist, but I guess the response to that would be through workers' unions, through syndicalism. I think they can offer relief. They can demand higher wages. Like push for higher wages, like which was generally the old conception of unionism, not necessarily the one that was like lived off of the government, which is that like people said we need wages, asking for raises. And I think that's a way for some workers to deal with becoming obsolete in an exploitative business.
All right.
Or through leaving the business and going to other businesses that offer higher wages.
All right. Thanks so much for that. So we have a question from Tiaga who says, "Can you ask Brenton and Connor, what or how do we plan communities around after a hypothetical, immediate, gradual restructuring, intentional communities like Vietnam, etc.? Thoughts?"
How do we plan intentional communities?
Yeah, so what or how do we plan communities around after a hypothetical, immediate, gradual restructuring? Intentional communities like Vietnam, etc.?
I mean, I guess, are you trying to say after a revolution and just like say it in a coy way? Is that what I'm hearing? I don't know. I guess you can't answer that, but yeah. I don't know. Connor, do you want to take that one? Because I've talked a lot.
I'm not really a revolutionary either, but so the position I'm taking right now is we still have a government system in place to do the same thing that we would do now. I don't really know what that has to do with my position, as far as I'm not calling for a radical change other than, hey man, you don't own that anymore. Everybody that works there does, and that's pretty much all changed.
Yeah. I'll say, I mean, I don't think we necessarily need to plan communities, if I'm understanding you correctly. Communities already exist. Communities spring up everywhere. They do it organically. So I don't think it's necessarily a good idea to plan communities unless there's like a very specific reason why you need to be doing that. In Vietnam, I've actually pointed to Vietnam a number of times because I think that they are one of the major success stories of more authoritarian communist tactics. But, I would say if you look at the way Vietnam did it and do that.
Tiago said, what I was asking is, do you restructure communities?
Unless there's a driving need to restructure a community, I don't see a reason to mess with it.
Yeah, like redlining in the States, I think should be restructured. But other than that, no.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much for that. We'll move on to the next question. We have a question from Uncle Thomas that says, "Did it Rojava or Rojava?
Rojava.
Okay. Sell oil to Israel through a broker named Madi Kahana?"
Oh God, I think you got a Nazi there.
Okay.
It seems to be what he's implying. I don't know if Rojava sold oil to anybody or not. I don't care if Rojava sold oil. If they happen to sell it through a broker who is Jewish, who gives a crap?
Gotcha. Okay.
But the Jews rule, man. Come on.
As one person actually said, I forget who it was, but he said, "If it rains on your birthday, the Jews did it." He said that's what all the far right believe.
That is what the far right believes.
Yeah.
But
all right. So our next question from Chrismer and Dave. I'd love to know each of their thoughts on syndicalism.
Do you guys want to take that first? Again, I've talked a lot.
I think Connor should. I think I want to start with Connor because he's really not getting a lot of speaking time.
Yeah. How do I feel about it? I say I align pretty tightly with it because I'm more ANCOM than I am market socialist. But yeah, I just kind of it's a good system, but I think ANCOM would be a better system as equality is more tightly knit to everybody, as opposed to anarcho-syndicalist system. That's not what I came here tonight to discuss, so I won't go into it.
Yeah, I'll second that to a certain extent. I think that syndicalism is a great temporary method, building a new world within the shell of the old. I think unions in the early 1900s, during the height of the workers' movement, they were a great replacement for government in a lot of ways. However, modern unions, with very little exception, have been gutted. They're toothless, and that's one of the reasons. I started as an anarcho-syndicalist and became a communist because I lost faith in modern unions' ability to actually be radical. I remember in New York City, there was a guy who was in an elevator workers union, and we, Occupy Wall Street, had called a general strike. And I said, hey, are you general striking on May Day, in solidarity with the other workers in the city? And he said, oh, my union never strikes. We will never strike. It's in our bylaws. So, if they weren't so damn conservative and toothless, I think they'd be great. But, they've been eroded.
All right, thanks so much for that.
And in my opinion on syndicalism would be, I guess, it's a good way to raise wages. I hope it doesn't get violent. Thing is, once it gets violent, then it gets messy. So just regular old-fashioned unions, which just work on trying to get workers higher wages. I don't see a problem with that. I just hope it doesn't get too violent. And then I guess you could consider me a temporary syndicalist. Depending on the situation, I would consider syndicalism to be an option. Otherwise, being it as a political system, I'll just hope it doesn't get that might lead to violence. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah.
As long as Jeff Bezos doesn't hire the Pinkertons.
Yeah.
All right, thanks so much for that. Our next question is from Uncle Thomas. Says,
This guy again.
one other question on Rojava. Didn't the Kurds marginalize Shias and Coptic Christians?
Okay, thank you, by the way, for the actual question there. Honestly, I've heard some stuff about that. I'm truly not sure. If they did marginalize, the Shia and the Coptic Christians, obviously that's a huge problem and it needs to be dealt with. I don't think it's a good idea for any society to be allowed to, marginalize minorities within it. And it would be a betrayal of socialism. It would be a betrayal of socialist ideals, and especially anarchist ideals, to mistreat communities. That's one of the big because Makhno went after the Mennonite communes in Russia, and I absolutely I find that absolutely disgusting. I wasn't there, so I'm sure things were more complicated than that. But if indeed the PKK-YPG did that, that would be a major problem, and I think it would be one that we should look at solving.
All right, thanks so much for that. We have a super chat just came in from Tiago. Thanks so much. I'm not sure. On my computer, I'm seeing your actual picture, and on this one, I'm seeing your cartoon picture. It's strange. But thanks for your $2. The PSL and DSA are awesome for organizing IMO.
Yeah.
All right.
Palestinian Liberation Organization and or I think that's the PSL and the DSA. Yeah, they do good work.
All right. Thanks so much for that agreement. We'll move on to Foppish Dilettante. It says, do any of this three-way wish to join the Satisfaction? I'm not sure if that was a joke or not.
The Satisfaction.
SATIS faction.
I can't get no satisfaction.
Yeah, I was thinking when I read it, I was like, that may be a joke there. So, all right, we'll move on. We have just a few more questions here. T-Back says, if Brenton and Connor do not like the way America is, are they willing to move to a socialist and a communist country for 5 years?
Love it or leave it. So what socialist or communist country might somebody be referring to? I would actually be really interested to 5 years in Vietnam might be a lot of fun, to tell you the truth. But am I going to uproot my life is here, my family is here. There are things there. I have roots in this country, so I would rather do that than run away somewhere else. But yeah, I wouldn't mind checking out another place. If I was unmarried, if I didn't have my son and I wanted to go spend 5 years somewhere else in the world, I'd love to do that.
All right.
I'll add to that. But then how could I sit in my chair and bitch about the situation? Come on. No, because then I can't bitch.
All right, thanks so much for that. We'll move on to our next question, which is from Lord Jeffrey. Says, Brenton, what is stopping any business owner from getting overthrown, punished by their workers?
The police.
All right, brief to the point. T-Back is back, and he says, to Brenton, at what age did you fall down? Oh, okay, so this is kind of a snarky remark.
It's okay. Yeah, at what age did I do what?
Did you fall down the stairs and hit your head so hard that you turn into what you are?
I became what I am. It is very interesting. So started out as a right-wing Republican when I was like Gregory's age, and I was a Republican up until college. I became a right-wing libertarian in college because I didn't hate gay people. I became a Democrat after I got my first job and realized how exploitative employers treat people. And I became an anarchist after hiking the Appalachian Trail, Maine to Georgia. So living in the woods for 6 months, and then moving from that to New York City, where I was confronted with like New York City and like the absolute heights of capitalist power and individualist ideology. So, all of that came together that put me at Occupy Wall Street. I did not hit my head. But thank you for asking.
Yeah.
I think I think I might be a little bit similar. Like I kind of started off as more conservative, and then I kind of slowly evolved into this individualistic anarchist thing. Like I was originally like a left-wing socialist. Then I kind of then I became a right-wing. It was a very sharp turn. Then I'm kind of thinking like I'm kind of in the middle. I'm kind of just like advocating. I think individualistic anarchism is like the best philosophy. I became right-wing libertarian, then now I'm more like an individualistic anarchist. I'm not really sure what I'll be in the future. I hope I'm not the same as I am now, because I don't want to just retain the same opinions I had when I was 13.
That's a really good attitude.
A lot of people ask as well how old you were. I was thinking 13 or 14. All right, Connor, did you want to...
Really quick?
Yeah. Did you want to add your story?
I took a really similar one to Brenton, which was I was pretty apolitical for a long time because I just didn't care. And then, the whole YouTube... I'm smart, and look at these crazy feminists. Oh, I kind of fell down that, like right-wing libertarian hole, and I was like, oh, I'm an intellectual, guys. And then my friend told me like one socialist thing, and I was like, oh, they're all stupid, maybe. And then I heard Sargon talk, and I was like, oh, they're really stupid. Abort mission, and, right-wing, and then I was like, oh, fuck left.
All right, thanks so much for that.
Glad you got out of that.
Yeah, so we only have a couple more questions, so if we can, let's just answer them as quick and short as possible. We have a question from Just a Good Old Boy. It says, what value does communism bring other than art and speeches?
What value does communism bring other than art and speeches are awesome. But other than that, I mean, I would say go and look at the workers' movement in the United States. Go and look at, honestly, you call yourself a good old boy. The original term redneck came from socialist farm workers and miners. They had a red bandana because they were, with the unions. You hear that song, Which Side Are You On? Communism strives to liberate labor. To bring about a workers' movement that allows people like you, like good old boys, to live dignified, full lives, as opposed to being a tool for some asshole from the city who doesn't care about you, doesn't care about your family, and wants to see you die in a coal mine so he gets an extra house.
All right. Thanks so much for that. Aries Leo says, can both systems lead to a successful and moral society if correctly implemented? I think they're referring to communism and capitalism.
I'll let you guys answer this one, unless...
Yeah.
Connor?
So I think they're asking Gregory, like, for you, could communism or socialism lead to a successful and moral society if correctly implemented? And then to the other guys, could capitalism do the same if correctly implemented?
Well, for communism and socialism, if it was not totalitarianly implemented, again, I kind of think the idea of a fully communist society is in an anarchist setting. It's kind of is very utopian. But if that were to occur, fine. That'd be like, sure, because like the idea of like having a stateless, moneyless, classless society could be a pretty good idea. But again, I'm kind of in the individualistic anarchist tradition. Like Benjamin Tucker and Lysander Spinner were socialists, so if in that sense it was implemented, then I guess it could work.
All right,
Marcus.
In reality, not really, because exploitation is immoral, and capitalism will eventually exploit workers for profit. As an ideology, I guess it could be like perfectly implemented to never do anything bad, but by that logic, anti-centrism is an ideology and could work theoretically. But I don't really work with like, well, if we do every single thing right, we'll get there and it'll be good. I just kind of go, yeah, but it's not doing that. It's going to fuck up, and capitalism will fuck people up.
Yeah. What I'll say is, I'm an eternal optimist, and I fear that capitalism can never actually do that because not just with exploitation, but just because the internal mechanisms of capitalism and the way it is structured simply incentivize bad behavior and bad ethics and morals. However, at my most hopeful, I will say that, I think with strong government regulation, if we take this crisis seriously, institute UBI. And then we build from that, we institute Medicare for all, and we build on that, and we get a Green New Deal, and we continue to build, and we deal with the crisis after crisis. Eventually, a society that is moral may grow out of that. I mean, systems morph and change into others as the world changes, and so I think capitalism could result in a moral system. I'm not sure how much that moral system of capitalism will look like capitalism. I don't believe we're living in the end of history.
All right, thanks so much for that. We had a super chat just come in from Stupid Or Energy for $10. Thanks so much for that.
Let me tell you, I love that woman. She is awesome. She was incredible in the last debate, and I want her to keep doing what she's doing.
Yeah, Sarah is always contributing to the channel, so we appreciate the support. She was getting kind of nasty earlier though with one of our regulars, and had to tell her, please keep it PG. Hate if we had some people complaining earlier in the chat about people criticizing the contenders and just beefs in the chat, and we just let things ride on free speech as long as it doesn't cross the line into hate speech that would get us on YouTube's radar. I just want to let everybody know that real quick. All right. So, Stupid Horde Energy says, we've had to, again, spend billions of dollars to bail out things that are too big to fail, that started with 9/11. It's happened again with Corona. When are we going to realize this isn't working?
So I'd respond to that by saying excessive bailouts lead to inflation. And inflation could arguably become worse than deflation. Well, I don't understand why this would necessarily be an argument against saying deflations happen, busts happen, and it's not a good thing. But using bailouts as well, like using government systems, also like and central banking to like with all these bailouts lead to inflation, which is an equally bad thing. Therefore, I think that the free market will have its booms and busts, but it will naturally form into an equilibrium. Yeah.
All right.
It's not a perfect system by any means. I don't think it will ever be a perfect system. But yeah.
Yeah, I will say inflation can actually be good, especially if you're in debt. Because if you're $20,000 in debt and the dollar loses half of its value, you're effectively $10,000 in debt. So inflation is necessary sometimes for controlling the ever-mounting debt that can't actually be repaid. I don't necessarily have a problem with bailouts because money isn't real. Like it's really not. It's imaginary. And saying that we can't do this because we don't have enough money is like saying we can't build this house because we don't have enough inches. But people get all confused about it and they think it's real. Now, what I will say is printing money to bail people out in an economy that is no longer growing and is in fact shrinking, if the rate of new products created drops off and there's more money around than people can actually use to buy things, that's when you get into an inflationary crisis, and that actually can be very, very bad and very dangerous.
All right, thanks so much.
Well, can I say one thing?
Yeah.
I don't understand why money is technically imaginary, but money is a very useful thing in society.
Yeah.
How do you decide? I think it's a really good way to mediate voluntary exchanges. Meaning, like, if I give you, like, if you carry my backpack from here to there, I will give you $5. Like,
yeah.
Like without that, back then it was just barter. It was just I'll give you a cow, but
well, it was never barter. Like that was Adam Smith made that mistake because he lived in a town and city dweller. He wasn't an anthropologist. Read David Graeber's Debt, the first 5,000 years. The way humans technically exchanged favor for favor is essentially the idea that everyone in a community is in debt to everyone else in that community at all times. So really it was you carried the backpack because you knew that somewhere down the line that other person you'd need them to carry your backpack for you. That's how we function for like 194,000 years, and then for the last 5,000 or 6,000 we created money to deal with those issues. Now, what I will say to work without money, what I would have you guys look into is what's called swarm technology. It beats both central planning and markets, because markets are sadly biased towards previous actors within them. If you look at like racehorse odds, those function like a market, bookie odds, because like somebody suddenly drops a bunch of money on this horse, the odds go up because everybody says, oh, that person knows something I don't. Well, maybe they don't. And similarly, experts a lot of times can be wrong. So there was a company that used swarm technology to aggregate individual inputs of humans, and they successfully predicted the winner of the Kentucky Derby, like not just the winner, but like the Triple Crown. And it beat out everything from the Vegas odds to the Derby experts. And I think that type of technology could be adapted to drive our industry and make decisions like where to build a house.
All right, thanks so much. So if we could just we have questions that are still coming in, so if we could just go as quick as possible.
I can hang out.
And yeah, we'll just be quick as possible on our answers, and then we'll fly through. This will be like the speed round. So Aries Leo says, Converse, is the problem with both ideologies not the people corrupting it from the seat of power? I think he's saying, like, hey, with capitalism, is it crony capitalists that are ruining capitalism? With communists, is it Stalin and Mao? I mean, you know, what do you guys think? Is it the?
I'll let you guys answer first.
Yeah.
I guess I would say it is kind of like I talked about this in my free speech. It was the progressive era, the welfare warfare state, the military-industrial complex, which led to the idea of capitalism becoming this like idea that's just basically like workers like the exploitation of workers, stuff like that. As like not giving proper products to consumers. Again, I think this might be part of the capitalist system in general. I don't really know. But it has ruined the concept of a free market, definitely. That's why people are like leaning in the socialist direction. They're very like opposed to liberalism because they believe it. But what I'm trying to say is that it's really not a product of liberalism. It's a product of corporatism, which is a completely separate thing, and which is political fascism. Yeah,
right.
Fascism. Yeah.
I will say that's you're confusing corporatism with corporatocracy. Corporatocracy is where corporations run things. Corporatism is a different thing where it's essentially government functions like industry functions like a body, and we can talk about that. That's a really tough distinction though to get. So millions of people make that error.
I guess both. I guess both you could say.
This is what I'll say on the matter. Power corrupts. So let's try to make sure that everybody has the same amount of power so that we don't have one or two bad actors screwing everything up. I also think human nature is mutable, and we can get to a situation where we can incentivize people to behave more humanely and bring out the better aspects of our nature as opposed to the worst.
All right, thanks so much for that. Did you want to say anything, Connor?
Yeah, I'll say a similar thing. It's basically like, it absolutely is corruption because people are corruptible. So I think we should be taking the democracy in a workplace and splitting the power into as many people as possible. And then a couple assholes like me will say, no, that's bullshit. You can't do that. And no, you can't bribe me because now I'm just dug into my hole of that's a bad idea because that's a bad thing to do. So I think we need to keep accountability to everybody instead of just one guy at the top.
All right, thanks so much for that. Anon says, how do the libertarian nerds feel about pulling in only 10% of the audience numbers you got with the third position debate last night?
Well, obviously when fur is flying and you've got some guys who have a community of rabid mouth breathers around them, it's going to pull in more views. I mean, people love spectacle. The debate before was spectacle, but, I think this debate is a lot more effective, and I think there's a lot better ideas being exchanged. So, maybe fewer people will see it, maybe they won't, but, I'm having more fun here.
I think the view count was pretty high. It was hitting 175 at some point, which is I think higher than average. So.
Well, that's actually averaged to a little low for us, but that is pretty. That is right on the what we.
The darn political video is usually a little bit less because you guys
political is a little less than religious or other topics. So, but
that's all right. We'll build that up.
So Stagnu de Morte just sent in, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, just sent in a $10 super chat. Thanks so much for supporting the channel. And says, as an engineer, I see people exploiting metrics to make failure look good and good look normal. Could you all admit that exploitation levels all economic ideology?
That exploitation levels are all economic. I mean, you can mess around with numbers to make something look one way or the other. Absolutely, that can happen a lot. But I think for instance, the people who said that the Steven Pinker argument that people are wealthier today and better off than they ever have been. That's messing around with the numbers. The fact is that it's difficult to measure whether people are better off or whether they're having difficulty. But what I think the way to approach that is to come at the problem with genuine compassion. And, even if we are doing better or doing worse, we should always be working as hard as possible to make this a better, more sane and compassionate world.
All right. Thanks so much for that. We have a question from Clay Corbin. Says, how is biodiversity valued in each of your models? Briefly, if we could. Biodiversity, how's it valued in each of your models? Briefly. Anyone?
If you guys want to, I can answer that because I think this guy's a Nazi.
Oh, is it?
I'm guessing he may be talking generally about biodiversity, or he may be trying to imply human biodiversity. I think biodiversity as a planet is incredibly important, and I also think that I grew up around dogs, and I know that the mutt dogs tend to be much more healthy than the purebreds, and you have to be very careful with the purebred dogs because their genetic pools are smaller and they have more diseases and congenital things that they have to deal with. So I think nature tends to push towards increasing complexity and increasing diversity, and I think it's really important.
Okay.
All I'll say is I don't want an ethno-state. That's it.
Sure. I guess it goes without saying, Gregory, or did you want to say anything?
I don't really. I'm not sure if that's entirely like has anything to do with it, but yeah. But I think biodiversity is compatible with my system. I certainly love animals. I wish I had a dog, but
All right,
like,
I got a puppy right here.
yeah.
You're not a hoppy.
I'd love to have a dog. I've got a dog.
There you go.
Oh, God, this is making me jealous.
So
Go get a dog.
we'll move on to our next question from Yolk Egg. It says, how do I get on to a debate here, Converse? Well, the way you can do that is you can send an email to moderndaydebate@gmail.com, or you can send me an email, conversecontender@gmail.com, or hit one of us up on Twitter. You should be able to direct message us there as well. So, Yolk Egg, whenever you feel like you want to debate, I'm sure any of these guys here would be willing to have another discussion. All right.
James has said, as short as possible, you get a faster reply. That's how I got on the first time. It was like two word answers.
All right.
I got in through like recommendation. Someone else recommended Modern Day Debate to me. I really wanted to do a debate, and then actually people were skeptical who were saying like it couldn't work. And then I had an interview, and then people said, "Oh yeah, it's pretty like it looks like you can debate." So yeah, just send an email. Just like prove you got to prove like that you can be a proper debater on this platform instead of just someone who's just going to spew nonsense, does not know how to properly debate or starts going off on ad hominems and insults. Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing that we prefer to see is we prefer to see you at least in one debate. That's not always necessary, but we do prefer that, especially now because the channel has grown so much, and we can get some negative feedback if we have somebody who's completely unfamiliar and then like a pro come together, because then it's like they're just not familiar with the issues. But feel free to send the email to either myself or James at Modern Day Debate, and we'll get you hooked up. All right, next question.
I was approached by an ancient wizard who sent me on a quest. I found a magic sword, slew a dragon, and that's how I got on this channel.
Yeah, we do pay Gandalf for finder fees, and so
Yeah, his talents.
Dumbledore he gets his finder's fee. All right, Gregory. Anon says, Gregory, are you familiar with the works of Hans Hermann Hoppe and radical capitalist Chase Rachels?
Oh my God!
Goodness. Okay. I actually really want to respond to this. Hans, I don't know who the second one is, but the first one I really dislike. I don't think he's libertarian in any sense of the word. He's very like authoritarian. The fact that he considers himself to be an anarchist is really, yeah. It's just, he's not an anarchist.
Did you want to say something, Brinton, about Chase Rachels then, I guess?
Christopher Chase Rachels? I know, I've met Christopher Chase Rachels. He is a complete weirdo. And he thinks that, praxeology is perfect and can never be wrong. I think he grew up like super religious, and he just transferred his kind of like fundamentalist ideas from God and Jesus to praxeology and Ludwig von Mises.
I think I have heard of him. I read a book called White, Right, and Libertarian. It's the same kind of like style as Hans Hermann Hoppe.
Yeah.
I really don't like him.
The fascists really shouldn't like him because he's pansexual.
Right.
I mean,
Connor, you got anything to add, or are you good with that?
No, I'd just be memeing on Hop, so no.
All right. Pepper Talk says, Converse, question, why would anyone do the dangerous or difficult maybe they mean job, in a communist socialist society? How could you have a communist society without authoritarianism?
I will point on that one. Go actually watch Chernobyl, because they have this whole thing right there where and this is real history. When that freaking plant exploded, people were throwing themselves at it, and they did it not because they would be rewarded with millions of dollars, not because they were bribed, and not even necessarily and not because they were forced, because you can't threaten someone with death to go and do something that is almost definitely going to kill them. They did it because it needed to be done, because that's the human spirit. So yeah, I don't think you need to cajole and force people into things.
Why do people jump in front of cars to save random people? Because they do.
All right, thanks so much. So
God, we need to play that scene. I swear, that scene where the guy tells them they'll do it because it needs to be done, and it's this. Oh, it's beautiful. Watch Chernobyl.
all right, so somebody made a comment just now. Why are these grown men debating a child? I think for the same reason why LeBron James, when he was like 18, 19 and entered the NBA, he was playing against 40-year-old guys because he's that good, because he's up to that level, right? So, but I thought I'd mention that because we got two more questions left.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Gregory is smarter than like 90% of the adult ANCAPs I've argued with online. So
Thank you very much.
All right. This actually may be our last question, I think. Hunter Rothman says, Converse, to Brenton, will you better explain what you mean by money is imaginary?
Yeah, money is imaginary. It's a symbol. Like it's literally just a symbol printed on a piece of paper that we hold to mean as a store of value. It only has value because we all decided it has value. And some people will say, well, okay, but that's fiat currency, but what if it's backed with gold? But gold only has value because humans decided it has value. And we decided it has value largely because it's shiny. The fact is that we have the ability. Actual wealth is intelligence plus productive capability plus technology. That is what the money symbolizes. And what we need to not do is not get caught up in this intelligence system that is money, and forget about all of the productive, important things that we have behind it. That's like what happens when we have an economic crisis, like in 2008. There was no war, there was no destruction. We still had everything that we had before, but some numbers went down in a computer system somewhere, and suddenly everybody loses their minds. There's a great little story about this where it's apocryphal. It didn't really happen, but like all the major banks decided they don't want their gold to be stored all over the place. So they get an island and they put all the gold on the island, all in these underground vaults. And for years, and they just trundle the gold across the street to every other bank. And then the CEOs of the banks come in and they bring their kids in and they say, hey, can I see the books? And the books are all in order. And the kids say, can we see the gold? Can we please see the gold? And they say, yes, of course you can see the gold. Take us to the gold. And the people say, oh, see, there was an earthquake, and actually all the gold in the vaults, we can't reach it anymore. It's all been lost. But the books are still in order. And of course, nothing changed because money was never real.
All right. Thanks so much for that response. That is our last question. So I want to just thank everybody that showed up, all the super chats and all the questions. And then I want to thank also our contenders for showing up and giving us an interesting discussion to ponder, to consider and think about. And then also want to say, if you haven't already, if you would, hit that like button, because it lets us know that you like this type of discussion, and we will have more of them. And then lastly, if you haven't already, subscribe and become a patron. Follow my lead and some others on that, and I'll support this channel any way I can because I learned so much from it, and it's free. And so I think that's all the questions we have, but we have tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Scholar Fiction versus Eric Hernandez. That's going to be an interesting discussion. And last thing is we had some people complaining about earlier in the chat that we are allowing people to infight. Some of the moderators say, things like about the contenders and the people in the chat, like, that they're arguing or whatever. Or we like to allow people to talk amongst themselves, as I said earlier, unless they cross a line. I mean, if you think about it, we have people. Some of the regulars we have are people like SJ and Skylar. We have people like Steve McRae and T Jump that are all these people who are, they disagree so much but they're all regulars here. So we want to make that a cool place. I mean, we want to make this a place where everybody can just kind of come together and have these conversations.
But I can just say one thing about that.
Sure.
There was this debate I watched, which was Django Science Lad versus I Hypocrite, and it went completely crazy. It was like, I think it was like unmoderated, and everyone was going nuts, like just ad hominems. Like I Hypocrite was going insane, and then Django Science Lad had to raise his voice because it's like it was like a really I think it should have been moderated more there. I think they like a little more. Moderation would be good because sometimes they cross the line. They really do cross the line, and I think that's when the moderator needs to step in.
Sure, and there are some people that get blocked and muted. Sure, anarchy, right?
But anarchism is distinct from anarchy.
I had to take the status shot.
So if you guys are thinking, man, I really like these guys. You know what? Maybe not him so much or him, but I like that guy. Their information will be in the description below, so you can check them out, follow their work. I'm sure they have a lot. I know most of these guys have a lot more work published or on YouTube. You can check out their channels and other debates as well. So if you want that, it'll be in the description. And as always, keep sifting the reasonable from the unreasonable.